Hey everyone, I'm Beth Walker and I am here with my friend Nicole, who is a military wife. And I am so excited for you guys to meet her that I am just going to pass over and let her introduce herself.
Hi, so my name is Nicole Carabia. I have been married to my husband for 20 years. He enlisted in the Air Force when we had been dating about 9 months. And so I thought, we're breaking up. uh, but, we stayed together. And after I graduated college, we got married. And so I've been with him his whole journey through the Air Force. He's been in 23 years. We have 4 amazing kids, and we've had 12 addresses in the last 23 years. So,
So that's one of the things that when coaches' wives get together, we always ask, we say, what's your name and how many times you've moved? So you've had 12 addresses. Have they all been stateside?
So 2 of our moves were considered overseas, but they were Alaska and Hawaii. So outside of the continental United States. I know it was a real hardship to live in those places.
Yes, that's awesome. Hawaii.
It's funny because military families, wives, spouses will often say, how many times have you moved? Like, how many addresses have you had? And when our kids were in youth group in Hawaii, their leader was so awesome. He was a former military kid, grew up in that environment. So he would have the kids introduce themselves by saying, where all have you lived? Because military kids never say, where are you from? It just
Yes.
from everywhere.
So, okay, so that's actually, so my kids still panic when they're asked, where were you born? Because they can't remember or where were you from? They're like, well, and my sophomore told me that it changes depending on who he's talking to, because he has figured out he knows that if he answers in a different way, they will respond differently.
Yes.
Do your kids, they can find or read people that way too?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like our one son, our second oldest, was born in Texas, but he only lived there till he was like 9 months old. So he has no recollection of Texas. So he used to say like his hometown was Texas when he was really little. But then we moved to Alaska, and we were there for almost 5 years. And so for the longest time, and that was the place that was like the most vivid in his memory. So for the longest time, he said, I'm Alaskan.
Oh, I love it.
So yeah, it depends. I mean, a lot of times they'll just say, well, I was born here, but my dad's in the military. And that usually shuts the conversation down because people realize, oh, he must have moved a lot.
Yes. Oh, yes. So one of the things in Lessons of the Sidelines I do is I talk about the parallel lives that coaches, coaching families, ministry families, and military families, how our lives run parallel. And you and I have chatted about that. And so today we're going to kind of repeat that conversation and allow people to kind of peek in on the things that we've talked about. And I also want to talk about you and the way you've pursued your calling and what that's looking like in this season. You watched the last conversation I had with Anne, and yeah, and so it's a tough season right now, and I don't know if you saw I posted on just a couple days ago, our football season got moved to February. And so, yeah, and so,
I missed that. Oh,
yeah,
no.
and so it's going to be fine. I'm actually relieved in the sense that it's like finally a decision was made. But,
Yeah.
we're kind of in this upheaval and chaos right now as well. And so, just this week has been like, we started one way and now we're like, and so there's just this constant, like, I don't know. But, we're really just in that space of like, just like I don't know, like and so we'll definitely get to that as well, because again, it's just a space where I think military and coaching, just even not in a pandemic, we definitely run
Yeah.
similarly. So
Absolutely.
yeah, but okay, so the first thing I wanted to make sure to ask you about is the okay, so what are the things you find the most challenging for yourself when it comes to moving? So we talked about like how many moves,
Mhm.
but so what are the things that are challenging, like coming into a community or for your kids? What are those things for you guys or for military families that you've heard?
Yeah. So I think for us, and for most military families, it's the starting over. It's the constant starting over. It's always trying to find a new school or find a new church or find somebody to give you a haircut, or where do you go when you need glasses? Like, it just, it's so difficult to just constantly uproot our lives and move like we do. I think for my kids, I look at them and I think they're like the bravest people I've ever known, because every couple of years, those kids walk into a new room, whether it's a classroom or a youth group room at church, and they have a sea of faces and they don't see a single familiar face. And I think that's the bravest thing in the world when you're 12 or 10 or 16, to always be the new kid. And so for a long part of this journey, I homeschooled my kids because the transitions in and out of schools it was so difficult for them. But even with homeschooling, I mean, you're still having to find friends and neighbors and a church. And so just the starting over has been probably the hardest part of our journey. I would say too, finding your community, because every time you start over, you're looking for your people, and sometimes your people aren't very easy to find. And
Yeah.
so that's just, it's a challenge. It's really hard.
So I want to back up and just ask one question. I'm gathering that the military isn't like, oh, they have kids, so we should make sure to wait till the end of the school year before moving them.
Now, PCS cycles tend to be December and June. And so
Okay.
people are usually PCSing. So for the longest time, it was like a running joke, like, hey, it's almost Christmas. Are we going to PCS? And I cannot tell you how many Christmases we had without furniture or our stuff in boxes. I think my oldest son, his first Christmas, we spent eating at the Hunan buffet because we were living in a hotel room.
So, and PCS means
A permanent change of station. So our
permanent changes.
permanent move.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
football coaches move in December too.
Yeah.
That's our transition. Like that's one of the well, actually I should say this. College coaches, it's like November to February is like job season. High school is the summer. And so it's like, which has been transition for us because like I was always get the itch like November. I'm like, all right, we're moving. Well, with
Yeah.
yeah, but now I'm like, oh wait, you're still in a teaching contract, so
Right.
we're not going anywhere. so, so yeah, those cycles are the same. But obviously, like basketball coaches move at different times, and
Mhm.
so that's interesting. So do you kind of get the itch, like, okay, it's December or it's June, and you just kind of know, like it's been 3 years, or you never know, like it could be any year, or
Usually we have a somewhat of a good idea when it's, at least for us, it's been
okay,
this way. Now, I don't know, like, I'm an Air Force wife, and Air Force is different than Army, than Marines, than Navy, than Guard, so for everybody, I think it's a little bit different. But for us, we have never been given an assignment totally out of the blue.
okay,
And usually when we get an assignment, we kind of know it's coming. So I get where are we going? Like, the anticipation leading up to the days and weeks leading up to, like, that assignment's going to drop any day now. And so you're just like, he'll call from work and you think like he knows. And so you answer the phone, you're like, where are we going next?
yes,
And he's like, well, I don't know yet. And you're like, oh man. Like, so, for us, it's a little bit, and sometimes a lot of families I know, when they get orders to move, like in December, if their kids are in school, they separate. The spouse
okay,
has to go. And
yep,
so the spouse will move to the new place, and the other person will stay behind with the kids and let them finish the school year. And so the active duty person goes ahead and they do the house hunting, and then it's crazy because you're paying for two,
Yeah.
you're paying out of pocket for one residence. Like, we have our housing allowance, but if you're in one residence and he's in another, you got to float both of those somehow. So there's definitely a lot of challenges. Does that happen a lot with coaching where
Yeah.
your spouse will go ahead?
Yeah. And then you're trusting that your husband's picking out your housing.
Luckily, mine does a great job. So when
That's
he
good.
finds the house, and he usually has to talk me into it because I'm usually like, I don't know. And he's got, he usually has it covered.
Uh, I just laugh because my husband's always like, there's a great big yard. And I'm like, you do this every time. And then you're like complaining about the great big yard and how much work it is. Like, I don't know why you keep doing this.
For the longest time, my husband would say he wanted to buy a house with land. And I was like, who's going to take care of that land?
Exactly.
Like, I got to know that land. I don't want land.
Exactly. I do. I see a lot of coaches' wives on the mowers in the fall, and I'm always so impressed because I would be budgeting money for that. I would
Yeah.
not. That is not my thing. But hey, more power to you. So, like so we do the separation thing sometimes. I do know. My husband always felt convicted that we needed to move together. And so we've always moved together. Our kids this last move were like, we're done. It's been hard. We don't like it. You guys need to stop. So figure it out and stop moving us around. And so, but you guys don't necessarily have a choice, right? The orders come and you have to go, or can you?
Well, I mean, there's ways around things, I suppose. I mean, I don't know. For us, our kids are, like I said, I homeschooled for a long time. So that was kind of like, we kind of just looked at it as one big adventure, because they weren't changing schools. But leaving the friends behind was always like the hardest part for them. I don't know. Like, I think like the last assignment that we were at, it was a 1-year assignment because my husband was in school. And so at the end of that year, we were supposed to move. So move someplace for 12 months. You don't even fully unpack. You just pick one closet and you shove a bunch of boxes in there. You take out what you need. You don't put your curtains up.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how we were going to do that. But then our son was a junior. And he was going to be a senior. And he was like, I don't want to move my senior year.
Yeah.
And so my husband just basically was like, listen, I will take a staff job. I will take a fellowship. I will go. He volunteered to go overseas for a 365 for a full year, just so that we could stay, knowing that he was going to miss our son's senior year. He was going to miss his graduation if he was gone, like knowing he would miss out on all of that. He was like, I'll take a 365. So he literally was volunteering to go overseas just so the kids and I could stay put for Jimmy's senior year. So, and it ended up working out because of course God had a plan, and and he worked it out perfectly. James got a fellowship and was able to be there for a 1-year assignment. And because there was another assignment that was open and they said, well, you can move into this job, but then we would have had to be there for 3 years if he took that job. Then we'd be moving our other son in high school. So it was like, we don't want to do that. So of course, God had a plan. He was like, let me just work this out perfectly, just tie a little bow on top. And then Jimmy didn't even have a graduation because of COVID. So
Oh, that's right. Oh, shoot.
we did a virtual. It was good.
Okay. Yeah. It really did mess with everyone's plans, didn't it?
But I keep telling, we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
Everybody's
This is true.
doing it, so.
This is true. All right. So one of the things I write about in my book is the challenges of building community, which you've already kind of mentioned. And so one of the things, like being a head coach's wife, and this is true whether you're moving or whether there's a promotion that happens when you're like just staying where you are. All of a sudden there's this like kind of separation that occurs. And so like, you're with these people who all of a sudden it's like, well, now this is the guy who's approving your vacation time, or like, is saying that you're, filling out the job evaluations or whatever. So, it can be it can be challenging. Do you guys find that that's true as well within the military community, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, that actually is true in a lot of different ways for us. We have trouble sometimes finding community within the community that we're living in, because once they find out that, if we're living in a civilian community and we're not living on base, and they find out that you're a military spouse, they're like, thank you for your service. And then you never hear from them again because they know that you're going to be gone in a year or 2 years, and they're really not interested in building those friendships and, and having to say goodbye. And I understand that. And, but, it's also true. Like I said, James enlisted in the military. So he started off his journey enlisted. So for the first 8 years, he was an enlisted airman, and then he started working on his bachelor's degree and crossed over and became an officer, went to officer training school. So I've seen from both ends of the perspective of the spectrum, which has really given me a unique perspective, because when I was an enlisted spouse, I thought the officer spouses were snobby. Sometimes they were a little standoffish. I mean, luckily the career that he was in wasn't so much like that, because that career field was like a big family. And so everybody kind of took care of each other. But in a lot of career fields, it's very competitive. And so the officer spouses kind of step back because they, there's rules about fraternization. And if someone's in your husband's chain of command, you can't necessarily be buddy-buddy, because then it can look like they're, favoring them when it comes time to write their performance reports and stuff like that. And so it can get a little sticky. Absolutely. It can cause some tension. One of the things that I think was the biggest blessing in my life was when we were stationed in Alaska. Some of the girls in our squadron really felt the urge to start a Bible study. They felt like the Lord was asking them to start a squadron Bible study. And so the rule for that Bible study was like, rank stays at the door. Everyone is welcome in this space. Here we are sisters in Christ, period. Of course, we talked about squadron stuff every once in a while, but for the most part, it didn't matter what rank, if you were enlisted or officer, like none of that. That was our space to grow together in our faith and to build one another up. And there are organizations like that, like on the base, Protestant Women of the Chapel, and, Bible study groups and stuff like that, where, there's definitely more community building within the military community. But it can be challenging sometimes.
I attended when my brother-in-law was deployed. My nephew is 4 months younger than our oldest, and so we flew down to be with my sister-in-law, and I attended a Bible study, and like everywhere we went, I needed to know my husband's social security number, and I was like, why? And they were like, oh, she's not military. What's going on here?
People ask me for my own sometimes, and I'm like, let me
right. I had to call him. I was like, they want your social security number. And he was like, this is weird. It was at the Bible study that they were like, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe you remember
what is his rank? Like, I always have to stop. What's his pay grade? I'm like, I don't know. Like,
right.
I have to stop and think about that stuff still. You have some spouses who are like on it. Like, they know all of that. I am not one of those people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had to do the whole, like, this is how many years in schools. And I was like, I'm gonna have to double check that. Sorry. I got close, but I forgot a couple from the dating years. But yeah, I can understand that, the fraternization rule. So in coaching, it's a lot of times you get jobs from like who you know. And so like a job will be posted, but it's like, well, it's the good old boys network. And so that can be a little challenging if you're trying to break in, and you're just trying to like prove yourself, and that you're a great coach. And so I kind of like can respect the whole, like, we treat everyone equally. That I can see that as being valuable. But at the same time, like, you just want to have girlfriends. Like, that can make it really hard.
I keep telling people, like, people in the local community, you want to have military friends. We
Yeah.
get to, yes, we have to leave, but we sometimes get to live in really cool places. And then you come visit and you stay for free. This is a good thing. It's like,
There we
I'm
go.
trying to sell myself. Like, I can be a really good long distance friend, I promise.
I have run into the whole, how long do you think you're going to be here as well? And it's challenging because we don't have control over that. I mean, sure, like we can always look for other jobs, but also he can get fired. And, I mean, coaches get fired in the middle of the season nowadays, and we don't have control over that. I mean, you have to be a little loony to have your career depend on 18-year-olds doing what you ask them to do,
Right.
and so I think it can be very challenging because ultimately we're here until God tells us otherwise.
Right.
And so, but if we define friendship by having to be only in person, we miss out on a lot of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay, so moving on, because we do have a lot I want to cover here. I think that there's this space, like, and I call it being like the shadow beyond the limelight, where we have to kind of protect our husbands' careers. And so, like, even being like in this, like, when you are with the community, you kind of have to keep a little bit of distance sometimes as well. And so that can be a little challenging, even when you finally do get to, I mean, you're not always able to necessarily share as much as maybe people would want. And that can also be a barrier, I think, sometimes. And also it can help you filter out who maybe wants to be a genuine friend.
True.
But I think that, we have to be cautious about what we say. Like, some people are looking for insider information. Definitely that's more of a concern for you with deployment. But how do you like how do you balance this when it's like you're trying to protect your husband's career because it's so important, and it's God's calling for him. But you also, before you married this man, God created you with this unique design and an important purpose. And you know I he like what I say, especially like during deployment, I mean, that absorbs the entire calendar, right? You live and die. Well, I don't want to say it that way, but like you're waiting, right? You're kind of in this
Everything's on
holding.
pause.
Yeah, everything's on pause. And so, um, for us, it's like what happens on football during football season and then the rest of the year. And
Mhm.
so, which, obviously we're readjusting now. But I think that, like, when you're trying to balance this, God has created us with purpose and passions and interests. And so, how do you pursue that and balance that and protect your husband? Like, what's the formula here, Nichole?
Super, super loaded question.
I know. I know.
Okay, I don't even know where to start. So, okay, so several years ago, I started blogging, and writing has always been something that has been a passion of mine. In a former life, I was a school teacher for a few years, and then I had kids, and then I homeschooled a bunch of them, and then I homeschooled only a few and put some back in school. So I've kind of had this crazy, like, I've worn a lot of hats over the years. So um, when I started blogging, um, I started to realize, like, you know how you can click on and see where people like in different places are reading. I started to get this very nervous feeling when I was seeing different areas of the world where I don't have any friends and I don't know anybody, and these people are reading my stuff, and I'm putting all this information out there about the military, about being married to a military spouse, about my husband's career. And so I pulled back quite a bit from writing, just out of fear, really. And there is, you know, a certain amount of protecting that we have to do. When he's gone, depending on where he's at, I may or may not be able to talk about that. And I may or may not be able to say where he is. I'm not going to pick up the phone and tell you over the phone where, you know what I mean? Like if we're face to face, maybe. So there's quite a bit of that military spouses struggle with, in terms of kind of being in the shadows of their career. Like you talk about being in the shadows of the limelight. That's a really difficult place, for me personally, because for a long time I felt kind of lost. Like it was really, and my husband is incredible, and I'm incredibly proud of everything that he has done in his career, every achievement, every accomplishment. But he's an Enneagram 3, so I'm pretty sure anyway. He hasn't nailed it down yet, and I don't think he's that interested in nailing it down. So of course I'm trying to, which you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
But he's very, very performance oriented. And so I jokingly say to him that he's in the military, but he's a professional student, because he's always going to school for something. He got a bachelor's, he got a master's, he got another master's, he went to this military school, that military school. Like, you know, he's always studying and learning and achieving, and he's a very high achiever. And so it's hard when you're married to someone like that. And like my primary role at this point is to be the support person.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of the person in the background, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's amazing. I get to be here, for my family, and that's incredible gift and a blessing. But then there's a little voice inside of you where the Holy Spirit's like, you know, I gave you talents, and I gave you passions, and I gave you dreams, and I gave you desires, and I kind of want you to use them. So I feel like that's a struggle. Some military spouses are like, they just go after what they want. They have these amazing careers, and they somehow balance it all with deployments and careers. And I am amazed by that. I don't know. I haven't never had to do that. I don't know how good I will be at that. I would like to try it out sometime. But I think it really depends on the person. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think it's a matter of timing? Do you think, I'm a believer that there's always space to be at least in preparation mode.
Yes.
And so, you know, maybe we're not writing publicly, but we're at least working on our craft. So we're doing it well, or we're studying so that when we do put something out, it's accurate.
Yes.
Those types of things. We're networking. I don't know. I mean, whatever it would be. But I also think that, so there should always be this, like for me, I'm a believer that there should always be a space of like building towards, so that it's not like, great, now I can start.
Right.
You know, so there should always be that momentum. But do you think there's also this, like, is there, I guess is the way I need to say it, because depending on the space you're in with coaching, there can be this pressure of, oh, you can't, that's not your role.
Right.
And so, like, are there those like unconscious pressures ever where you kind of are encouraged to maybe wait until your spouse is further along in his career, or, you know, to a certain space before you're allowed to kind of enter into your own space? Or is it really just like, my kids are young and they need me? And, that's really what's most important, which is totally fine because our kids are only young for so long and they need us. And
yeah, I think I don't know necessarily that there's a pressure.
okay,
If there is, I don't necessarily know that it's anything other than something that's self-imposed.
okay,
Me
that's good.
personally, I have always felt in a constant struggle. Like I've always felt called to a couple of things, right? I'm called to take care of my family. I'm called to take care of my kids. And somebody, when you've got this other person that you're partnered with who is always doing these big transitions and moving, and even if you're not moving from place to place, even if there's not a PCS, he's moving from one job to another job. He's in training for this thing or that thing. And so when his life is in constant flux, somebody's got to be the constant.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be there when the kid is sick and when the kid is,
Yes.
and he would love to do that, but that's not what he's called to do right now. And so, I pick up that slack. And so there's that. So it's never been anything that someone has said, you have to wait until, because the reality is I could go do whatever I want to do,
Yeah.
but is that the best thing to do? And so,
There it is. Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah.
but for me, like a couple of years ago, to what you said about, being in preparation mode. So in 2018, I went back to school to be a professional life coach because I started really dreaming about how I could take my writing and all of these experiences that I've had and really help other people, military spouses, but now I realize there's so many other spouses who are ministry,
Yes.
coaching spouses,
Yep.
federal agents, like people who are in this constant. And hello, I mean, if Corona has taught me anything, it's that aren't we all just kind of flailing around trying to figure this thing out?
Yeah.
I guess kind of in a way we all are in the same boat. But people who get stuck in these transitions from one career to the next career, from one assignment to the next assignment, from one passion to the next passion, and somewhere trying to navigate all of this, we just get stuck in that. And I thought, how great would it be to be able to be a person who could take all of these experiences I've had, come alongside somebody and help them through and kind of, help them navigate that. And so I went to school and I did the whole thing. Had a friend help me build a website, and for 2 years I haven't done anything with it because James was in this school and it was a year long, and then we were supposed to move, and then we didn't move, and then I kept homeschooling, and now we moved again. And so now but yes, you're right, you're always in that preparation. So in these 2 years I've spent a lot of time continuing the journey of self-discovery that I started in my coaching class. I really dug into the Enneagram, really have been digging into different areas of my personality, really spent a lot of time praying and seeking the Lord and talking to him about, what is this business going to look like when I start it? And, what is that going to mean for me and for my family? And really learning how to be a little more obedient to that calling, and realizing that I don't always have to jump in with 2 feet and go gangbusters, but obedience is a step by step, right? It's a day to day. So I don't have to necessarily graduate and start my business and go at it full throttle. I'm still being obedient to the Lord if I'm continuing to learn. I'm reading books about coaching. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm, taking those steps in that direction. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I've kind of spent the last couple of years setting the framework, and so now it's going to be the big leap off the side. but
Yeah.
but
I think that I love that because I think that's so important to remember. And you hear that from like authors, and because oftentimes from the observer, what do we hear or what do we see? And like big stars, oh, well, they got their big break and now they're famous. And they're like, no, I went to acting school and I was a waitress and I was in this terrible play. Or, the author who's like, I submitted to 20 agents and was rejected all these times. And I've written all this other stuff that no one's ever seen. And, we have to remember that like the being obedient is included in all the behind the scenes years that no one sees, because all those building blocks are what make you confident when
Yes.
you actually step in and say, okay, let's go. It's not just the years of experience, it's the education and the time you've spent praying um that pausing and saying, okay, God, it's yours. Let's
Mhm.
do this together, and inviting him in that maybe you wouldn't have done,
Right.
who knows? I mean, or you would have done after you got in and went, oh, I'm way over my head, you know?
Do this by myself.
Yeah.
Or, oh, I'm not in control of this. God, can you take control? Like he's like,
Thanks for asking.
so glad you gave me that opportunity,
Yeah,
Nicole.
because we women, we never do that.
I say military spouse, like I think I was always a control freak, but this has brought it out to the nth degree. Like, because you really realize after like 9 months into our marriage, I realized I'm not really in control of this. I mean,
Yeah.
right after we were married a year when September 11th happened, and I had just found out the day before that I was pregnant with our first child.
Oh my.
Hadn't even had like the blood test yet, like to confirm it. And so I'll never forget that feeling of I am in control of nothing.
Nothing.
Because I literally, like, he was in a very high risk career field at that point. He was an EOD guy. And if you know anything about EOD, that's the bomb squad. Like, they're the guys who go in and they're, diffusing ordnance. And so I was like, he's gone, he's leaving. And I don't know when he's coming back. And so it's really a place, that point of surrender where you have to, and I mean, I am not good at it. I can tell you, like, I'm white knuckles holding on to that control, the illusion of control
Illusion.
all the time. And the Holy Spirit's always like, you could just let go a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, I really do have this.
Yeah. I write about that. You're gonna love chapter 3.
I'm so excited.
Okay, I'm gonna move aside here. Okay, so the next question I have is about marriage. And so one of the things I have seen, okay, let me see here. What was my question? Oh, okay. So we're still in the call when it comes to calling. Like you had said, James will say, like, hey, I've got this school that I'm doing, and so one thing I've noticed is men will say, like, I'm going to attend this school, whereas women are like, honey, what do you think? And maybe we should like consider, or they'll just like assess the situation and decide, oh, there's no space for this. Like, I just shouldn't even bring it up. Like, do you find that that's true? Like, do military wives talk about that, and just like whether it's guilt or just, I just know the answer is going to be no. Do you think that maybe we could benefit if we just had the conversations and like,
Yeah.
yeah.
My husband, I don't think he would ever tell me no.
Yeah.
If I went to him and said, this is really what I want to do and I want to pursue this, he is forever my biggest cheerleader. He was telling me a year before I started a blog, you should be a writer. What are you doing? Why aren't you writing? He is the one who heard a podcast and a life coach talking on a podcast he was on a flight back from Asia, and I went to pick him up at the airport that morning at like 5 a.m. and I roll up and I'm still in my pajamas. I mean, I got coffee in my hand and I'm half asleep driving to the airport to get him, and he gets in the car and he's like all jazzed, you need to be a life coach. Like, this is the thing for you. Like, he's forever seeing those things in me way before I see them in myself. So I don't think he would ever tell me. He would always be like, but it's, do I ask the question, or have I decided in advance we can't do that? I can't do that. And so I think for me personally, that's been a big struggle. Now, a lot of military spouses that I know feel the same way as me. There are others I know who don't. They are just the high achievers and the high performers, and they are confident and they just put themselves out there. So yeah, it is definitely a challenge. James, he calls it, I get a little lump in my throat every time I say it, but he always calls it sacrificing in the shadows. He says that that's what I do. That's been my role in our marriage. And he's forever trying to push me out of the shadows. And, you know, after so long kind of in that support role, you start to question, do I have a voice? Like, can I really be out there? Am I going to be good at that again? Like, have I lost my ability to, you know, so there's a little bit of an internal struggle there that takes place, but
Mm-hmm.
he's always
But
cheering
like
me.
any amazing partner, he sees and wants you to thrive in your sweet spot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see things in him too, you know, before he sees them in himself. He always said he joined the military as an accident. Like he just woke up one morning and decided, I'm not doing anything with my life. I may as well just go enlist in the military. Like literally that's his story. But I've looked at him for years and said, are you kidding? God has put these incredible gifts of
Mm.
leadership in you, you know? So it really, I mean, God has just perfectly matched us and just really, helps us call out the best in each other, I think. And it's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Well, I think that we should be encouraging the wives who think like maybe we have in the past
Yeah.
and to have the hard conversation with our spouse
Yes.
because you will likely find that your cheerleader, your partner is like, yeah, I've been just waiting for you to figure it out for yourself, right?
And I mean, you know, feel free to talk to the Lord about it too, but chances are he's going to tell you,
Yeah.
guess what? Do it. Like, go
Yeah.
do it.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so in military culture, or is there a military culture that adds to the pressure of putting your kids and spouse first? Oh, I think I already asked you this one. I already asked you this one. Because we already kind of talked about that. Do you think that there's a spoken or unspoken culture that adds to the assumption that pursuing your calling is going to be difficult? I think we already asked about that.
Yeah, you know, the only thing I would really add to that is that I don't want to minimize. It absolutely is difficult. Like when you're moving, like for me as a teacher, for example,
Okay.
when we first, our very first move, our first PCS, for me to like get my license in another state, it was going to cost me X number of dollars. And then for me to find childcare. So I was going to make this much money every month teaching, but by the time I paid for my license and I took my classes that I needed to take to renew my license, and then I was paying for childcare, like there was no point. There was no point in me working. We weren't going to make, if anything, because he was only like a senior airman at the time. So, I mean, you know, the salary it wasn't going to cut it. And so there really is a difficult, and so a lot of times we make those choices that I'm going to stop working. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm not going to step into my calling. I'm not going to pursue this right now because my kids are young and I can't afford daycare, or my husband doesn't, like his salary, you know, can't provide all for me to go back to school too, you know. So there's, I don't want to minimize that. And then when you have teenagers, like you think teenagers like, oh, they're so self-sufficient, but the reality is teenagers need you
Yeah.
a lot. They need somebody there. And so, you know, there is I don't, like I said before, I don't know that it's necessarily like an overt cultural thing, but I do feel like a lot of military spouses like me, friends of mine that I've talked to, we make these choices for our families because we believe it's what's best for our families.
Mm-hmm.
Our husbands are serving their country. We are serving our families.
Mm-hmm.
We got their back. And so, yeah.
Well, and I also think once you have 12 moves under your belt and you know, if that resume does have 12 different jobs on it, you say that like with the military and they don't blink. You say that with a coaching career and they don't blink. You say that with a teaching career and they go, maybe you're not such a great teacher.
Right. Or, you know, I've picked up and moved. So what does my retirement look like? Like,
Yes.
because your retirement doesn't move state to state with you. You can pull it out, you can put it in this, move it to transfer it to that. So that's another challenge is a lot of spouses face, is the nurses. I know spouses who are nurses who've had this huge problem with relicensing every time that they move. And I actually think that that was something that Michelle Obama and Jill Biden worked on when they were in the administration to try to help make it easier for military spouses when they transfer from one place to the next. Because I know like nurses and therapists, like physical therapists, doctors, psychologists, like you have to relicense every time you move. And so a lot of us choose to just walk away and take care of our families, not because we don't still feel called to do what we were doing, or not because we didn't love what we were doing, but because it's just so dang hard. And it costs so much money and time. And by the time you get it all squared away, you're moving again.
Right.
So.
Well, and that brings up a great point. I mean, this is the type of thing where it's like you need, like, military spouses have probably been talking about this for decades, because women have been the teachers and women have been the nurses. But, how far up has that conversation been getting? And, and now we're kind of in this situation where there's a need for more two-family homes, and there's more women in the military, and so there's more even male nurses, and more male teachers, and so it's kind of crossing boundaries. But I do know the licensing on the nursing thing has expanded because a coach's wife, when we lived in Virginia, there was like this specific license that you could get, and it was for like 30 states. Right. And so I remember now that you say that, and that was like a significant thing. But
and
you
that's the thing.
only live in certain states and get that license.
And that's a thing for teachers too. There's national board certification, but if you want national board certification, you have to, like, it's a process, and it takes like a certain amount of time, and it takes them coming into your classroom to observe, and I remember thinking, oh, I'll just do that. And then, we got our orders to move. So, then you have to be in the school system again. And so you run into the same thing. So you have to really be in one place long enough. And, some career fields in the military, they move very little. I mean, in other career fields, you're moving all the time. So it really depends on what branch of the military, what job your spouse does, and then what you do outside of the home.
And that depends on your calling, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing there's this phrase that coaches' wives say, which I despise, which is the phrase, football widow. I absolutely hate it. I never say it. But one space where our lives don't really overlap is the space of deployment. But I do want you to talk about it, because I am a firm believer that when our military families are deployed, this is a space where coaches' wives really have an opportunity to serve the military families in our community. And it's something I've written about. But I would really love for you to kind of just speak into this, because there have been seasons where I've been the only coach's wife on staff, and it's been the military wives in our communities, along with FCA and pastors' wives, who've been like, we're so glad you're here, welcome, because they're like, oh, we know what it's like to move, and we know how lonely you must be. And so, and also, like, I will say this too, the military kids are the more compassionate kids in the classrooms, because they know what it's like to be the new kid. Yes. And so when your kid walks in and they are the one who's looking around, and it's the military kids who have always welcomed our kids first. And so, because we've always had our kids in public school. And so our younger son, his best little buddy, they're former military. And so I think that, that compassion is built in when you've experienced someone else's situation. And so I would love for you to just kind of talk about like deployment experiences, and then also give us some ideas on how we can serve our military families when deployments occur?
So deployments, I feel very blessed in that my husband, he's deployed
Mhm.
quite a few times, but not nearly as much as what other families have had, and not for the lengths of time that other families have. So I feel like we've been very blessed, probably because he's always in school. um, but he really, I feel like we've had it very good. And in the times that he has deployed, I mean, God has been so faithful to me to put people in my life. Um, the very early deployments, like the very first time he deployed, I was teaching. And we were newly married and I was pregnant. And I mean, the other teachers in that school just, came around me. And then, like I said, he was EOD, and EOD is its own little community. It's its own little family. And those families came around me. And when I started having complications and trouble with my pregnancy, literally someone else in our shop stepped up and said, I'm a single guy, I don't have a family yet, send me over there and get him home so he can be
Oh,
here. And so they did. They flew him home to be with me, which I realize is a huge thing. I mean, that was no small undertaking, and that sacrifice, I think as long as I live, I'll never forget that. I mean, it was so dear and so precious. But military spouses rely so heavily on our friends. Our friends become our family, especially during those deployments. Another time we were deployed, and I had met this friend, and our boys hit it off right away. And they lived in one town and we were living on base. So we bought a house in that same town. And then right after we bought that house and moved there, our husbands both deployed. And so she and I kind of started hanging out. And I mean, it was everything from it's a Friday afternoon and I'm showing up at her door with pizzas for her to feed her kids dinner, or, hey, I have a doctor's appointment. I mean, you just pick up the slack for each other and you help each other through those things because you just know. I mean, God has put neighbors that have surrounded me who have come to cut my grass and, and sit with my kids while I put up Christmas lights. Like when my kids were really little, I had my neighbor's daughter would come over and sit with them so that I could put up Christmas lights. Even my doctor one year brought over a pie to me for Thanksgiving when he was gone at the holidays, like showed up at my house. So, I mean, when I say God has been faithful, he has been ridiculously faithful beyond what I deserve. I mean, it's been so incredible. And the church that we are in this is our first assignment that we've ever had where we lived here before. So we were stationed in this same base from 2006 to 2011. And now we are back here again. And so we are back at the same church that we were at the last time we were here. And I will never forget that very first time. The first time we went to the church was about a week before James deployed. We had just moved up to this community. We had just bought our house, had moved in. He was going to deploy. We went to church together. And he was like, I like that church. So I was like, okay. So I decided while he was gone, I'd keep going there and maybe try a few other churches. Well, he left and I didn't go to church for a few weeks because I was juggling all these little kids. And I literally had just had our daughter. She was only a few months old. So I had 3 kids and they were ages like 6 and under. And so, yeah, I was trying to sleep. And so long story short, my daughter, started having all these problems. And I remember being at that church. It was only the second time I had gone, and I'm standing in the back and I'm holding her. And I had just had a pediatrician 2 days before tell me she didn't even weigh 6 pounds yet. And they're talking about doing surgery because she has all this reflux. She can't hold anything down. They want to explore her intestines. And I'm like, so I'm in the back of the church and all of this is just weighing on my mind. I'm thinking my husband is gone. My baby, my little 6-pound baby is going to have surgery. Like, I still have a garage full of boxes because we didn't have time to unpack before he deployed. And the young pastor saw me in the back. The assistant pastor came to the back and was like, are you okay? And I'm literally just standing in the back holding this baby, crying through the message. Have no idea what the pastor's even talking about. I'm just crying. And he came back there and just Kate took me out to the lobby and asked me what was going on. And I just, of course, told him everything. And I'm crying, laid hands on my baby, laid hands on me, just prayed over us. And it was just the most sweet, precious thing. And, like the next day, I'm getting phone calls from the church. How are you? How's your baby? What can we do for you? A couple days later, one of the life groups had taken over the task of bringing us meals. And so literally there are meals showing up by people I don't even know, who I've never even met. I mean, and they're bringing meals to my door every day at 5 o'clock and dropping them off for me and the kids. It was so much food. I was putting stuff in the freezer. Like, my kids are like 6 and 3. They don't eat anything, you know. So, I mean, God has just been so faithful to us. So I would say for military spouses, it's just the letting them know that you're there. And sometimes thinking of a need that they may not ask for and in advance, you know, so instead of saying, can I make you dinner on Friday and bring it over, say, hey, I'm bringing you dinner on Friday. Are your kids allergic to anything? You know, it's those things, you know, and I think my kids are tender to it when they see other families whose dads are gone for 6 months or 8 months or a year. You know, my kids are like, I'll watch their dog when they go away to visit their family, or I'll cut their grass, or mommy, we should make them cookies, you know. So I just think I don't know how I would have made it through those times. I think I'm stronger and better for those times, but I did not get that way on my own. I mean, I don't pretend to say that I'm Superwoman and I made it through all these deployments and look at me, because God was faithful. He put so many people there to help me through those times.
I think that's one of the biggest things I learned about coaching was that about the coaching life is that phrase, like, it really takes a village to, you know, I really wanted to be this independent, like, I don't need help. I've got it. And that's just not possible when, you know, when coaching starts and you walk out and your husband's walked to work because both cars have flat tires, but he was in such a rush, he didn't even bother to tell you. And now it's time for the kids to go to school, and you now know both cars have flat tires, you know, or, you know, whatever it might
be. Kids.
Right. Or like, you know, whatever it might be, where you're just like, oh, okay, got it. You know, like, we're really doing this on our own because you have got to work these 16, 18-hour days to serve these 100 players so that we can have a roof and food. And so I get it. And I'm not resentful, but I also got to I can't do the rest of it by myself.
And that's a big thing, is like guarding against that resentment. Was very critical for me early in our marriage, especially when we were very young, when we got married and started having kids, and, you know, and guarding against that feeling of bitterness, like I'm here, I'm doing all the hard work, where are you, you know, not letting that creep up, because it can, and the enemy is very sneaky about using that, and he will plant that little root of bitterness, and before you know it, it is full grown, like it's put the root system down in your heart and it's growing. So you really have to be diligent about not allowing that a space in your marriage and in your mind and in your heart, and just to keep it in perspective, like, he doesn't want to miss 3 months of his kids' lives. If he could his way, he'd want to see their first steps. Like, he would give anything to be there on Christmas morning. I cannot even count how many birthdays, holidays, you know, special events he has missed over the years. And he will never have the opportunity to go back and get those moments back. He saw them grow up sometimes through computer screens. Thank God for Skype. I remember when Skype came out, it was huge, you know, and now FaceTime, like, we did not have that in the beginning of his career. And he literally would just miss months of the kids' lives. And it's so critical to keep in perspective that we are a team. We're in this together. And I'm not going to allow myself, can I feel sad and overwhelmed and anxious and stressed out? Yes, I can. And then I need to move on. Like, I can't camp in that. And when we do try to take it all on and do everything ourselves and not ask for help, a lot of times that creates a lot more tension, a lot more stress, a lot more anxiety. I've seen a lot of spouses who don't want to ask for help. And so they just kind of try to do everything on their own. and they're angry and they're bitter and they're stressed out and they're overwhelmed. And before you know it, you're sitting there crying into your bowl of ice cream because because you just can't. You have to ask for help.
Yeah. I call it the mid-season meltdown. So that would happen like every October for me, where I would just hit this like, I can't do it anymore. And Ordell would be like, no one asked you to. Like, why are you doing it all by yourself? No one asked you to. And I was like, oh, but it just was getting to the point of being willing to ask for help. But the other side of that is then that stubbornness of being willing to ask for help, and that independence then once they are back home from deployment, or once that postseason is back, it's like reacclimating them into the home can cause some challenges. And I remember like our kids, like dad was fun to play with, but like, like when he would try to discipline them, they were like, who are you, man? So there was some challenges that came along with that. Did you find that can be?
Yeah, absolutely. So we call it reintegration, when they reintegrating to family life when they're coming back from deployments. Even if it's a 3-month, 6, it doesn't matter. When you are the spouse who's been there, you've been calling all the shots. And I already admitted that I'm a control freak and I'm bossy. So, my poor husband, bless him, it has not been an easy 23 years. But, so it's hard because I feel like he's coming in and he's stepping on my toes. And the kids, and like you said, sometimes they don't want to be disciplined. And his job when he comes back in is to just be fun dad. And then how do I not get resentful that, you know what, I just spent the last however many months telling them no and keeping everybody alive and making sure the bills were paid and taking them to and from everywhere. And now I want to be the fun one for once because I haven't got to have fun with them for all these months. I'm busy running around like crazy. And so, yes, reintegration is real. It is a challenge for every military family to kind of feel their way back into that relationship. It takes a while to get back in that groove. And just it's a mindfulness of each respecting each other's boundaries and each other's voices, realizing that the last few months have not been easy on me, and they certainly haven't been easy on you either. And so we are trying to kind of find our way back to each other and back to some sort of new normal. And it's interesting because when we were stationed in Hawaii, my husband didn't deploy at all, but his job there required travel, constant travel to and from Asia. And so he was gone the one year, I think it was like 180 days of the year had been gone. So there were all these short trips. So it was like 3 days in Japan, and then he'd be home for a week, and then he'd be gone to Singapore, and then he'd be back for 2 days. And then, so it was a constant in and out. And that was a whole thing too. Like just that readjusting to when he's gone, how we do things, and when he's home, how we do things, and finding the balance in that again. And I never had really thought about it before, but a lot of like spouses, women whose spouses are in business, are CEOs, they go through that constantly because they're always traveling on these trips. And at airline, guys who work for the airlines or women who work for the airlines, it's so we're not the only ones. Like military spouses, we have our challenges, but we're not the only ones. Like
well, and that's like recruiting season for us, and you finally get to the point where you're like, I mean, we just can't run our life by whether you're seeing a recruit or not. We just gotta keep going, So, but you feel guilty because it's like, you're here, we should take advantage of the fact you're here because you won't be, but then, so it's a whole thing. Oh, these guys, we love them. If we didn't love them so much, right, it wouldn't be such a challenge.
I know. But I look at it and I think I would not have this life without him. He wouldn't have this life without me. And neither of us would trade this life for the world.
There we go.
We wouldn't trade it for anything else. I wouldn't give this up for anything else. And so we just kind of have to suck it up sometimes and take the good with the bad. Both of us do with each other,
Yeah, because no relationship's gonna be perfect. And I think if we start to think about like, oh, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, or, if he chosen a different career, or if, we can pretend that something would be perfect. And the reality is it wouldn't be, because it's just our assumption of what would happen. We
Right.
can't control how everyone else would respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And even if we thought about it, then coronavirus would happen. So who knows?
Then we'd have a pandemic.
Yeah. I don't know. I saw this thing yesterday. It's still making me laugh so hard, but like this guy put out this tweet and it was like, your kid's gonna go to school with a Paw Patrol mask and he's gonna come home with a Spider-Man mask because he traded at lunch and the whole school's gonna shut down. And I just thought, like, what world are we living in that is normal and everyone knows exactly what he's talking about, and that is going to happen. That is going to happen.
I think I said it to you when we were messaging back and forth. Like, I feel like I'm in this weird, like, I'm old, right? So like this old Super Mario Brothers world, like the repeating, like the warp zone that you go in where the board just repeats over and over again. And every time then you find a new spot, you collect a bunch of coins, you think, yeah, I won. And then you're like, oh, nope, it just keeps going.
A new world. Where's the cheat?
I know. Please, where's the tube that sucks us up and we see the light and go, oh, yeah.
Someday.
I know. It's a brave new world.
This is true. But that's another thing, is that we're all experiencing and adjusting to new normal together. And so, no one's an expert right now. But
No, we're all doing the best we can.
Exactly. So is there anything before we wrapped up that we haven't touched on that you wanted to make sure to share about anything with the military or our overlapping lives or pursuing your calling?
Well, nothing specific for me, but I did want to say something to you. So this morning, I was actually, like, every couple months, I feel it necessary to read the Sermon on the Mount. That's just me, because I feel like it just, I don't know, I read it and something new jumps out at me every time. And it just reminds me who I love most. Like, who is this Jesus that I am just in love with? And so I was reading this morning and in Matthew 5, and he's talking about salt and light. And, that's our mission in this life, is to be salt and to be light. And if the salt loses its saltiness, it's no good. And if a light is hidden and it's not shining, it's no good. And so I was thinking about you, and I was just praying about your book and about what you're doing and your blog and your ministry. And so I just wanted to thank you for being salt and light, for not, letting all these cares and concerns and all these things, that burdens that come with the life of being a coach's wife, just to wear you down and make you lose your saltiness. And you have inspired me, and I know lots of other women. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for your voice. I'm grateful for your obedience to do what God has called you to do. And I really believe in what your next step in your next piece of this journey. And I'm so excited that I get to be a part of it. I never would have realized the overlap in our lives. It took a pastor's wife friend for me to understand the overlap of military spouses and ministry spouses. It took, a federal agent friend, like spouse, to help me realize the overlap there. And it took a coach's wife friend for me to realize the overlap in our lives. And when you see that, you realize it's not such a lonely life after all,
Yes. Thank you. That is an awesome word. I really appreciate that. But I also love that you're pointing out exactly what I want to share, is that it's a bigger world and we have a bigger community that we can tap into for support and for relationship building. And it can be so lonely when people look at us like we're crazy when we say, well, I can't go to that wedding because we have a football game that night, or, I can't do this thing because, we are, we're moving or whatever. And, but when we can understand those things, even though we're not in the exact same situation. And so, these are the types of conversations and supports that will continue over in the Lessons from the Sidelines Mighty Network. And I hope that we can continue to relationship build. And one of the great things about that is that there's that location thing. And so, even though there's not a military base here, there are military families here. And I think that's something that people will realize. There are military families in tons of communities, even if you're not right next to a base, because there's ROTC on college campuses, and there's mini stations around different spaces.
Reserve units and guard units, and yeah, absolutely. And I think about where I am right now. There's college football. This is a big thing here. There's lots of coaches' wives, lots of coaches' spouses around me, that I can reach out to and build community with. And so, I think if we're going to have this community, it takes being willing to listen to one another. And in order to listen, somebody has to speak. And so you're using your voice to speak. You're giving other people space to use their voice to speak. And we're all listening to one another and learning from one another. And beautiful things happen.
That's the hope. That's the hope. Well, yes, and those coaches' wives. Well, I don't know what your area is doing right now, but I will say, when the announcement came out in Illinois, I posted a little hey, in a private group. I said, "How we doing?" And I got a lot of memes where they were all like, so if they're moving anything around in your state, you may want to reach out to them, because they might need a girls' night out.
Yeah, so I'm going to make a note of that and try to find out what in the world is happening with sports here.
We
have football season in the fall. I did hear chatter on the news the other day that they're talking about moving all the sports to the spring, and I thought, how are these kids who overlap sports, like the football players who also run track, and
they're pushing everything. So it's football starts in February, and then the spring sports are starting afterwards in May and running until.
What about basketball? And
well, right now basketball's staying where it is, and I don't know. I think everyone's kind of going, yeah, right. But we'll see. So.
Well, yeah, I will definitely be finding out who those coaches' wives are and reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm here."
Yeah.
I got coffee. Come on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And just a quiet place to cry if you need.
I'll have ice cream, and you can cry into the bowl if you need to.
There you go. Safe spaces. It's just amazing. But thank you so much for your time, Nichole. This has been a great conversation. I just appreciate your heart and just your willingness to encourage me, but also other military and coaches' wives. I'm so excited for them to continue to hear your voice in the Mighty Network as we learn from each other.
Yes, thank you so much, Beth.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.